The first thing anyone noticed about her wasn't her rank or her file. It was how she walked into the briefing room like she already understood she wasn't wanted there. The base was operating at full pressure that morning. A mission window had just opened, intelligence teams were still updating maps, and senior operators were arguing over extraction routes that could change at any moment. Everything was tight, controlled, and unforgiving. No one had time for unknown variables. And then she was added to the roster. Lieutenant Mara Collins. No special introduction. No background explanation in the briefing packet beyond the basics. Infantry transfer, temporary attachment to the operational unit, pending field evaluation. That alone was enough to make half the room lose interest in her. The other half became openly annoyed. Captain Rourke, who led the unit, glanced at the file on his tablet and then at her standing near the wall. She wasn't trying to take attention. If anything, she looked like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Clean uniform, hair tied back, gear already issued but untouched. "You're the attachment?" one of the team members asked without bothering to hide the tone. "Yes, sir," she answered. A few quiet laughs followed. Not loud enough to be a confrontation, just enough to make a point. Rourke didn't stop it. He had seen enough soldiers come through rotations to know first impressions usually corrected themselves in the field. Or got people killed. Still, something about her didn't sit right with the team. It wasn't aggression. It was the opposite. She wasn't trying to prove anything. That made people suspicious in a different way. Sergeant Holt leaned back in his chair, scanning her like she was a misplaced supply crate. "We're already short on time. Why are we babysitting a transfer right before deployment?" No one answered him directly because no one needed to. Everyone was thinking it. Mara didn't react. She just stood there, eyes moving slowly across the room, taking in the layout, the gearboards, the rotation schedule on the wall, like she was memorizing it without permission. Rourke finally spoke. "She's here because command assigned her here. That's the end of it." But even he didn't sound convinced. They gave her a spot in the corner of the staging room, not assigned seating, just wherever there was space left. Her name wasn't added to any of the early mission discussion boards. When maps were spread across tables, people angled their bodies so she couldn't see details unless she leaned in. She didn't. Instead, she observed. There was a rhythm to the unit. Who spoke first? Who interrupted? Who deferred to whom without saying it out loud? She noticed how Sergeant Holt always positioned himself slightly behind Rourke's right shoulder when suggesting alternatives, like he was testing ideas without owning them. She noticed how no one asked her anything. And she noticed something else too. Something small. The timeline for the mission briefing had been changed twice in the last hour. Not officially announced. Just updated silently on one of the internal boards. Most people hadn't even registered it. But she had. She looked at it once, then looked away. No reaction. That lack of reaction irritated Holt more than if she had questioned it. Later that morning, gear inspection began. The team moved fast, checking weapons, comms, and field packs with the kind of efficiency that came from repetition. Mara followed the process exactly as instructed. No improvisation, no deviation. Still, she was slower. Not because she didn't know what she was doing, but because she was double-checking everything. Once, then again. "You planning to go on a date with your rifle or use it?" someone muttered. A few smirks followed. She didn't respond. When she reached the comms check, she paused slightly longer than necessary. She adjusted the frequency dial, checked encryption status, then paused again. Just for a moment. Holt noticed. "You got a problem with comms?" he asked. "No," she said, but her eyes stayed on the device a fraction longer than normal. Then she moved on. By midday, the tension wasn't spoken about, but it was everywhere. She hadn't made mistakes. That was the problem. People expected mistakes. They expected hesitation, confusion, a reason to label her incompetent. But she was too controlled, too quiet, too precise in ways that didn't match the story they had already built about her. So the story shifted. Not too incompetent, too untrustworthy. There was a difference in how those two ideas lived inside a unit. One meant you corrected someone. The other meant you watched them. During a short break, Mara stepped outside the briefing building. The base airfield stretched out beyond the perimeter fence. Helicopters parked in formation, support crews moving like clockwork between equipment stations. The kind of controlled chaos that only looked stable from a distance. She stood near a support column, not speaking to anyone, not checking her phone, just watching. A logistics officer passed behind her and slowed slightly, glancing at her insignia. "You new to Rourke's team?" he asked. "Yes." He gave a short nod. "Tough unit. They don't like outsiders." "I noticed," she said. He almost laughed at that, but stopped himself. "Just keep your head down. They'll either accept you or chew you up." Then he walked away. Mara stayed where she was, but her attention shifted to something near the edge of the airfield. A maintenance crew was working on a transport vehicle. Normal activity, routine checks. Still, she watched them longer than necessary, like she was looking for something no one else had been told to see. And for the first time that day, something subtle changed in her expression. Not fear, not concern, recognition. But she said nothing. And after a moment, she turned back toward the building, where the unit was already gathering for the final mission briefing, unaware that the presence they had just dismissed was already noticing cracks in the operation they were about to step into. The training facility was built to feel like the real thing. Urban structures assembled from modular steel frames, simulated civilian zones, controlled noise systems that could replicate distant gunfire or collapsing buildings. Everything was designed to pressure even experienced operators into making mistakes. Today's exercise was simple on paper: coordinated entry, target identification, and extraction under contested conditions. No one believed it would stay simple. Mara Collins stood at the edge of the staging line with the rest of the unit, helmet under one arm, waiting for final instructions. The others had already settled into their usual roles without discussion. Years of working together meant assignments were often assumed before spoken. Mara didn't have an assumed role. Captain Rourke handed out the final brief. "This is a stress scenario. Expect disrupted comms and false signals. Stick to protocol. No improvisation unless absolutely necessary." His eyes briefly passed over Mara when he said it, like the no improvisation part was partially aimed at her. Sergeant Holt gave a short, almost satisfied nod. Mara simply listened. No reaction. That was starting to bother people more than disagreement would have. They inserted into the training zone in two stacked teams. The environment was designed to disorient. Narrow corridors, mirrored windows, shifting sound emitters. Even experienced operators could lose orientation if they rushed. Holt's team moved first. Mara was placed at the back of the second element, technically a support position. No one asked if she was comfortable with it. No one cared. The first few minutes went cleanly, too cleanly. Then the comms began to distort. At first it sounded like normal interference, expected in this type of exercise. Static bursts, occasional clipped audio. But then the pattern changed. Short interruptions at precise intervals, almost rhythmic. Mara noticed it immediately. She looked at her comm unit, adjusting volume slightly, watching the timing between interference spikes. Something about it didn't match standard simulation disruption profiles. She noted it, but said nothing. The first target building was cleared without resistance. Too easy again. Holt called it out over comms. "This is supposed to be contested? Feels like a walkthrough." Rourke responded. "Stay focused. Second phase will escalate." But Mara had already shifted her attention to the layout markers on the corner of the corridor walls. They had changed. Subtly. Not enough for most people to notice under movement, but enough that room numbering didn't fully align with the original briefing map. She slowed slightly. The team ahead kept moving. The second phase hit fast. Doors that were supposed to be unlocked were locked. Hallways that were supposed to be clear had simulated obstacles deployed mid-exercise. Lights shifted from neutral white to dim red tones, simulating emergency conditions. Then the first contact occurred. Simulated hostile fire erupted from an upper corridor. The team reacted instantly, taking cover and returning controlled fire. But something was off. The firing pattern didn't match training dummies or automated systems. It was staggered, reactive, adaptive. Mara's eyes narrowed slightly as she moved into partial cover. She checked her sector, then the angle of incoming fire. Not scripted. That realization didn't reach her voice yet, but it changed her posture. Holt's voice came sharp over comms. "Targets are moving." "That's not standard AI behavior." Rourke responded quickly. "Hold positions. Could be upgraded simulation logic." But even he sounded uncertain now. Mara leaned slightly to get a clearer angle down the corridor. Another burst of fire hit the wall just inches from her position. She tracked the rhythm. There was intent behind it, not random. She keyed her comm. "We're not dealing with standard simulation behavior," she said calmly. Holt cut in immediately. "Oh, now you talk. What, you wrote the program?" A couple of clipped laughs came through the line. Rourke didn't shut it down fast enough. That hesitation mattered, because the next moment changed everything. A flashbang detonated in the adjacent corridor. Not part of the expected training package. Too loud, too sharp, too real. The team instinctively reacted, but the coordination broke for half a second. That half second was enough. Two operators lost visual contact with the main group as doors shifted and smoke flooded the hallway. The layout no longer matched the original drill. Mara noticed it instantly. "This isn't training configuration anymore," she said. No one answered. Not because they disagreed, because they were already dealing with disorientation. Holt tried to regroup. "Rourke, confirm status. Something's off in Sector 2. Static answered him. Comms dropped for a full 3 seconds, then came back scrambled. The system was no longer reliable. Now it was actively misleading. Mara moved forward slightly, scanning intersections. She saw a pattern in the corridor changes, sections sealing behind movement, forcing the team deeper rather than allowing reset. A controlled funnel. But she didn't voice that yet, because the others still believed this was a test. She was starting to think it wasn't. The team regrouped near a junction point, tension rising. Holt turned to her directly for the first time. "What are you seeing?" he asked, unwillingly. It wasn't respect, it was necessity. Mara studied the corridor ahead. "Routes are being closed behind us," she said. "Not randomly, structurally. We're being guided." "Guided?" someone repeated. "Yes." Rourke stepped in. "By who?" Mara didn't answer immediately, because she didn't have proof yet. Only pattern recognition, and patterns like this didn't belong in standard training systems. Another corridor sealed shut behind them, this time louder, metal locking into place. No simulation disclaimer, no instructor override, just closure. Holt stared at it. "That's not training tech." For the first time, no one argued. Even Rourke didn't. Mara looked down the remaining path forward. It was the only route still open, and it felt less like an option now, more like a direction someone had chosen for them. She adjusted her grip on her gear, still calm, but now fully alert in a way the others had not yet reached. And somewhere behind them, deeper in the shifting structure, something moved that wasn't part of any exercise they had ever been briefed on. The extraction should have started with clarity. Instead, it started with silence. Not the calm kind of silence before an operation, but the kind that meant systems were no longer fully under control. Comms flickered between scrambled channels, then stabilized, then flickered again, like someone was testing how much control they could take without fully breaking it. Captain Rourke stood over the final briefing table, eyes locked on updated satellite feeds. The mission had shifted from training simulation to live deployment in less than 30 minutes. That alone was already wrong. Mara Collins stood slightly behind the group, not touching the table, just watching the way the data refreshed in uneven intervals. She had seen transitions like this before, when systems weren't simply failing, but being overridden. No one had asked her yet. That was still the pattern. Holt leaned over the map. We were told this was a standard extraction window. Why are we suddenly looking at active interference zones? No one answered immediately, because there was no clean answer. Rourke finally spoke. Command pushed updated intel. Situation on the ground is unstable. We go in fast, we get out faster. Mara's eyes stayed on the map longer than anyone else's. The insertion point had changed. Twice. And the pattern of those changes wasn't random. She noticed the spacing between updates. Too precise. Too evenly timed. Like someone was deliberately adjusting their positioning to create a controlled path. A corridor. She didn't say that yet. Because in units like this, being right without proof didn't make you credible. It made you a problem. The insertion flight was rougher than expected. The transport cut through low-altitude turbulence as they approached the drop zone. Inside, the team checked gear in silence, but the usual rhythm of pre-mission preparation was fractured. Conversations were shorter, movements sharper. Everyone could feel the instability, even if no one could define it. Holt sat across from Mara, tightening his gloves unnecessarily hard. You still think this is some kind of guided pattern? He asked, voice low. Yes, she said. He gave a short laugh without humor. Or it's just chaos and you're trying to make it feel controlled. Mara looked at him briefly. I don't try to make it feel anything. That ended the conversation, but it didn't remove the tension. It only shifted it sideways. Rourke overheard fragments but didn't intervene. His attention was elsewhere, on the radio, on command updates that kept arriving with slight delays. Delays that shouldn't exist in a secure channel. The drop happened under low visibility conditions. Dust, smoke, and uneven terrain swallowed their landing zone immediately. The world outside the transport was already unstable before their boots hit the ground. Standard procedure would have been to establish perimeter, confirm comm stability, and move in coordinated formation. They didn't get that chance. A burst of interference hit the comm network the moment they deployed. Not full blackout, selective disruption. Certain channels remained clean, others degraded into static. Mara noticed which ones stayed stable, and more importantly, which ones didn't. The team moved into a staggered formation. Rourke led. Holt followed close. The rest spread into support positions. Mara remained slightly offset, still in the formation but not fully absorbed into it. That wasn't intentional anymore. It was just where she naturally ended up when systems around her were unstable. The terrain looked simple at first glance. Broken structures, abandoned equipment, low visibility corridors formed by collapsed concrete barriers. But the spacing between debris didn't feel natural. It felt arranged, like something had been cleared to allow movement along specific paths. Holt picked up on her slowing pace. Don't tell me you're analyzing rocks now. I'm not analyzing rocks, she said. What then? Movement constraints? He didn't respond, but he followed her gaze briefly anyway, and that was enough for him to notice something subtle. The open spaces weren't random. They formed lines of travel that converged deeper into the zone. Not defensive scattering, directional funneling. They reached the first checkpoint faster than expected. Too fast. Rourke checked his map again. This shouldn't be here yet. Mara stepped closer without being asked. The checkpoint marker was real. Physical. Equipment crates, signal relay, temporary structure. But it didn't match the pre-mission layout. It was moved, she said quietly. Holt frowned. Moved by who? No one answered immediately, because there were only two possibilities. Either command had updated the mission in real time without properly notifying the unit, or someone on the ground had already been here first. That's when the first real contact happened. Not training drones, not simulation fire. Real controlled suppression from concealed positions ahead of them. The first burst hit the outer edge of the team's formation, forcing immediate cover response. Dirt and debris scattered across broken concrete. The sound was sharp, disciplined, and intentional. Rourke reacted instantly. "Contact front, take cover." The unit moved, but not cleanly. Because now it wasn't a drill. It wasn't controlled escalation. It was active resistance. Holt returned fire. "This is live. This is real engagement." Rourke didn't confirm. That was the problem. He didn't deny it either. Mara dropped behind a barrier, scanning angles instead of firing immediately. Her attention wasn't on reacting. It was on mapping the origin points, 3 shooters, possibly 4. All positioned in overlapping fields of fire designed to contain movement, not eliminate it immediately. Containment again, not destruction. That detail mattered more than anything else. "Fall back to secondary cover," Rourke ordered. The team moved, but the terrain immediately shifted against them. Not physically shifting, but tactically collapsing. Paths they had just used were now exposed. Cover that had been stable moments ago was now compromised. They were being herded. Holt looked over at Mara again. "Tell me you see this too." She nodded once. "Yes." It was the first time she confirmed anything without hesitation, and that single word changed something in the way Holt looked at her. Not trust, not yet, but recognition that she wasn't guessing anymore. Comms degraded further. Now only partial transmissions came through. Rourke tried command again. "Base, confirm situation. We're under live fire." Static returned. Then a fragment of response came through, broken, distorted, missing key words. Mara listened carefully, not to the content, to the timing between transmissions. It wasn't random interference. It was structured delay. Someone was filtering information flow in real time. She adjusted her position slightly. "There are at least 2 communication layers active," she said. Rourke looked at her. "Explain." "One is ours. One is controlling what reaches us." Silence followed that. Even Holt didn't interrupt this time, because now the implication was clear enough that no one needed it explained twice. Another burst of fire cut through their position. Closer this time, a near miss. The team shifted again, but the movement paths were shrinking. Their options were narrowing. And still, no extraction confirmation had come through. Rourke keyed comms again, voice sharper now. "We need evac authorization now." Nothing. Mara watched the terrain beyond the firefight. Then she saw it. A movement pattern in the enemy positioning. Not random suppression, guided pressure. They weren't being attacked to be destroyed. They were being redirected toward a specific point deeper in the zone. She realized it fully now. "This is not a standard hostile engagement," she said. Holt snapped. "Then what is it?" Mara didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't something she was supposed to have yet, but the pattern was too clear to ignore. "This is extraction control," she said finally. "We're being moved, not stopped." Rourke stared at her for a moment longer than before, and for the first time, he didn't dismiss what she said immediately. That hesitation changed everything, because in the distance, beyond the smoke and fractured terrain, the team's only remaining route forward began to close in a way that suggested the mission had already been decided for them long before they ever landed. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened in layers. First, the comms went completely dark. Not static, not distortion, just absence. The kind of silence that made every operator instinctively check their equipment twice, even though they already knew it wasn't a hardware failure. Something deeper had taken control of the communication chain. Captain Rourke stopped walking immediately. "Comms check now." Holt tapped his unit. Nothing came through. "Dead," he said. Another operator tried a backup channel. Same result. Mara didn't move right away. She was listening, not to the silence itself, but to the timing of when it started. The cut hadn't happened randomly. It had happened exactly when they crossed a specific terrain boundary. That mattered. Then the terrain itself changed how it behaved. Not physically shifting, but tactically. The open corridor behind them, previously their fallback route, was now blocked by deployed barriers that hadn't been there minutes before. Not natural debris, not collapse. Installed structures. Controlled ceiling. Holt stared at it. That wasn't there. Rourke's voice tightened. We keep moving forward. No one liked that answer, because forward was no longer a choice. It was the only remaining option left to them. The firefight ahead intensified again. This time closer, more precise. Rounds impacting in controlled bursts, forcing them to break formation and compress into tighter positions. It wasn't chaotic suppression. It was directional pressure. Mara watched the angles carefully as she moved behind partial cover. They're tightening the corridor, she said. Holt snapped back immediately. Who is they? But even as he said it, he knew the question wasn't fully fair anymore. Rourke didn't answer either. His focus was on trying to re-establish any form of external contact. Nothing was coming through, not command, not base, not support. They were fully isolated. A sudden explosion went off further down the corridor, not large enough to kill, but perfectly placed to collapse a structural support beam. The effect was immediate. The path behind them narrowed again. Another exit removed. Now there were only two directions left. Forward or forward. Mara exhaled slowly. They're compressing us toward a central node. Holt turned toward her sharply. Stop saying they like you know who it is. I don't know who it is, she said. I know what it is doing. That distinction didn't calm anyone. It made things worse, because it suggested intelligence behind the operation, not just enemy presence, a system, a controlled environment, a hunt with structure. Rourke finally made a decision. Break through the front line, we push hard and regain mobility. It wasn't ideal. It was survival. The team moved, and that's when everything shifted from controlled pressure to direct engagement. The fire ahead intensified sharply, not random bursts anymore. Coordinated volleys designed to break their forward momentum completely. Mara moved with the team, but her attention wasn't on the incoming fire alone. It was on the timing gaps between bursts. They were consistent. Too consistent. Like a metronome. Holt took cover beside her during a brief pause. His breathing was heavier now. This isn't a mission anymore, he said. Mara didn't respond immediately, because she agreed. But saying it out loud changed how people behaved. And behavior right now mattered more than truth. Rourke shouted orders further ahead, trying to maintain cohesion, but cohesion was already breaking down. Two operators were separated by terrain shifts and smoke cover. Visibility was dropping. Then came the second collapse. A controlled breach behind their right flank opened suddenly, barriers shifting just enough to expose them. Fire came through immediately. One of the operators went down. Not dramatically, not theatrically. Just a sudden break in movement, then stillness. That detail hit harder than anything else. Medic! Someone called instinctively. But there was no clear line back. No safe retrieval path. The team hesitated for half a second too long. That was all it took for pressure to increase again. Rourke realized it immediately. We can't hold this position. Mara looked at the map marker on her wrist display. The system had updated again. Without command input, the endpoint had moved closer. Again. She finally spoke with more urgency than before. They're forcing us into a convergence zone. Holt looked at her. And what happens there? She didn't answer immediately, because she didn't have full confirmation yet. But she had enough pattern recognition to understand intent. Final control point, she said. Rourke turned toward her fully now. Explain what that means. Mara hesitated for the first time, not because she didn't know, but because saying it would force everyone to accept something they weren't ready to believe. Then she said it anyway. It means this isn't about blocking us. It's about collecting us. Silence followed. Even the firing ahead seemed to feel less random after that. Another structural collapse occurred on their left side. Now the corridor was fully narrowed. One viable route forward remained, and it was exactly where the pressure was strongest. Holt looked at Rourke. "We're being funneled." Rourke didn't deny it. He couldn't anymore, because the map on his tablet had begun to lag behind reality entirely. What they saw in front of them no longer matched any official feed. They were operating blind. Then came the moment that changed the leadership dynamic completely. A coordinated burst of fire pinned them in place long enough for Mara to notice something critical. The firing pattern changed slightly. A gap. A predictable one. Every 8 seconds. She tracked it twice, then a third time. It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, and it wasn't meant to kill them. It was meant to control their movement timing. She turned slightly toward Rourke. "We can break through on the gap cycle." Holt shook his head immediately. "That's insane! You're guessing under fire timing now?" "I'm not guessing," she said. But this time, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because she was right. And Rourke saw it in her eyes. Not confidence, certainty built from pattern recognition under pressure, a different kind of authority. He hesitated, then gave the first order he didn't fully own himself. "On her call, move on her timing." Holt looked at him like he couldn't believe it. But the unit shifted anyway, because survival had already stripped away most arguments. Mara watched the firing cycle carefully. Inhale, pause, burst. She lifted her hand slightly, waited. Another cycle, then, now. They moved. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but fast enough. They broke the pressure line at the exact gap she identified, slipping through a corridor that had been mathematically designed to remain closed under normal reaction timing. That was the first time the team didn't question her judgment immediately, because it worked. But ahead of them, deeper in the convergence zone, something far more controlled than any of them had yet seen was waiting. They cleared the corridor faster than anyone expected, not because the danger disappeared, but because the structure of the engagement changed again, like something behind the operation had recalculated their response speed and adjusted accordingly. The pressure eased just enough for movement. That alone felt wrong. Captain Rourke noticed it first. "Why is it quieter?" Holt didn't answer. He was still catching his breath, scanning angles that no longer showed immediate threats but didn't feel safe either. Mara kept moving forward, not cautiously anymore, purposefully. Because the pattern she had been tracking since the training facility was no longer just theory. It had reached its final shape. The terrain opened into a wide, controlled space. Too open, too centered. A convergence point. And waiting there, clearly visible now through the thinning smoke, was a command structure that did not belong to the field unit. Temporary towers, signal arrays, field-grade command equipment. Not improvised, not hostile, operational, real military infrastructure. Holt slowed down. "That wasn't on any map." Rourke's voice dropped. "It wasn't supposed to be." That answer changed the tone immediately, because it confirmed what Mara had been saying without fully saying it. This wasn't a broken mission. It was a constructed one. A group of personnel stepped forward from the perimeter of the structure, not armed like frontline operators. Command presence, clean uniforms, marked insignia. One figure in the center didn't move like the others. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't reacting. He was observing. Colonel Dorian Hale. The unit didn't recognize him instantly, but Rourke did. And the moment he did, his posture changed. Not fear. Recognition of authority above his level. "Hale," Rourke said quietly. Hale didn't respond immediately. His attention was elsewhere. It was fixed on Mara. Not the team. Not the situation. Her. The firing had stopped entirely now. Not paused. Stopped. As if someone had flipped a switch and declared the engagement complete. Holt looked around, confused. "Is this extraction?" No one answered him, because it didn't feel like extraction. It felt like evaluation. Hale finally stepped forward. "You adapted faster than projected," he said calmly. Rourke frowned. "Sir, we were never briefed on live hostile simulation parameters at this scale." Hale didn't look at him when he replied. "You weren't supposed to be." That silence hit harder than any explosion earlier in the mission. Mara stopped walking at the center of the convergence zone. Not because she was told to, because she understood she had arrived at the endpoint. Hale's gaze stayed on her. Then he spoke her name. "Lieutenant Collins." Holt blinked. "You know her?" Hale ignored the question. Instead, he looked at Rourke's team. "All of you were part of a controlled operational stress integration test," he said. "Real-world terrain, live interference systems, adaptive engagement protocols." Rourke's expression tightened. "This wasn't training. It was evaluation," Hale corrected. "And she was the variable." That word landed differently. Variable. Mara didn't react outwardly, but something in the team shifted when they heard it. Holt looked at her again, this time with a different kind of confusion. "You knew?" he asked. Mara didn't answer immediately, because knew wasn't accurate. She had suspected, then confirmed patterns, then accepted probability, but not certainty of intent. Hale stepped closer. "This unit was selected to test reaction under compromised command continuity," he said. "Most teams fail because they rely on structure." His eyes moved briefly to Rourke. Rourke didn't respond, because he understood what that implied. Then Hale looked back at Mara. "But you weren't here to test the team." A pause. "You were here to test them against you." Silence settled over the entire formation. Holt finally spoke, voice lower now. "Against her?" Hale nodded once. "Mara Collins is not an attachment transfer." That line changed everything in the way it needed to. "She is tier-level operational assignment under classified oversight." Rourke's jaw tightened. "That's not in any personnel file I received." It wouldn't be. Hale's attention remained fixed on Mara, because her prior designation is not publicly accessible. Another pause. Then the words that finally broke the team's assumptions. "She has operated in environments your unit only simulates." No dramatic tone, no emphasis. Just fact. Holt looked at her again. This time, no sarcasm, no dismissal, just uncertainty built from recalibrating everything he thought he understood. "You were running us the whole time," he said quietly. Mara finally spoke. "No." Her voice stayed steady. "I was reacting to what you were placed inside." That distinction mattered, and Hale confirmed it with a slight nod. "The system was adaptive," he said. "She wasn't controlling it. She was navigating it faster than the system could reframe around her." Rourke exhaled slowly. "So the mission failure points were intentional pressure tests," Hale said. Then Holt asked the question no one else wanted to. "And the engagement?" Hale didn't hesitate. "Simulated adversarial elements, controlled escalation protocols." He looked around the team. "You were never in uncontrolled danger." That should have been relieving. It wasn't, because everyone remembered how real it felt. Mara stood still through all of it. Not because she was unaffected, but because this outcome was one she had already calculated as a possibility. Hale took one final step closer to her. "Your decision at the convergence break confirmed readiness," he said. "You deviated from expected command structure when it mattered." Rourke looked at her sharply. "That was against protocol." "Yes," Hale said. Then, after a pause, "And correct." That contradiction settled heavily across the entire unit. Holt looked at Rourke, then back at Mara. "So what now?" he asked. Hale answered. "Now you understand what you were operating alongside." He turned slightly toward the team. "And what you will no longer underestimate." The atmosphere shifted again. Not hostility, not tension, something closer to recalibration, respect forming in the space where certainty used to be. Rourke finally looked at Mara directly. No sarcasm, no skepticism, just acceptance of something he hadn't been given permission to see earlier. "You could have ended this at any point," he said quietly. Mara met his gaze. "No," she replied. "I was here to see what you would do before you broke." That was the final piece. Not dominance, not superiority. Assessment. Hale stepped back slightly. "The exercise is complete," he said. Then, more quietly, "And so is your assumption about her." The team stood in silence as the infrastructure around them began powering down, as if the entire environment had been a temporary reality built only to collapse at this exact moment. No one spoke for several seconds, because what remained wasn't confusion anymore. It was understanding reshaped under pressure, and for the first time since she arrived, no one called her a liability. The base lights dimmed as the final systems shut down, leaving only the steady hum of evacuation transports in the distance. The mission site, once a maze of pressure, fire, and uncertainty, now felt almost unreal in its silence. Mara Collins stood a few steps away from the unit she had been judged by just hours earlier. No speeches, no demand for recognition, just a calm presence that now carried a different weight in every mind around her. Holt was the first to break the silence, giving a short nod she didn't need to acknowledge. Rourke followed after a moment. "We misread the situation." Mara's answer was simple. "You were supposed to. Not harsh, not personal, just the truth of the assignment." For a moment, no one had anything else to add. Then the transport doors opened, signaling the end of the operation. As the team began to move out, the distance between assumptions and reality felt smaller than it ever had before. And Mara, still quiet, still composed, walked with them, no longer an unknown variable, but something far harder to dismiss again. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Your support helps these stories reach more people who enjoy military dramas like this. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.